got a new chair. I would show you the back of it, but it's kind of spoilers for those of you who haven't seen One Piece. But just know, this is a very special chair and it cost me a ton of money. Anyways, the first page. This is going to be a long one, I tell you. So, I have read almost the first 3 volumes today. I'm just going to be talking about the first one. Sorry, we see my puppy in the back. Hey, puppy. How you doing? Oh my goodness. There's a little baby. This is Mochi, my cute little puppy. Anyway, sidetrack. There's a lot to talk about. And I have watched many shows. But one that I've been putting off is Berserk. And it might have been for good reason, because this show is super dark. If you are new to manga or new to anime, this is a good first start. Yeah, top 10 best starting manga, Berserk, #1. No, I'm joking. You have to be in the right mental space to get into something like this. It is not for the faint of heart, for sure. It's definitely covering a lot more like darker topics, more dark topics. I don't know if Muscle Man's gonna, judge me on my grammar, but it is a wild ride, I should say. There were some things that I'm not a huge fan of, but I think it's mainly because I don't understand Guts' character yet. Now, by the time you get to the 3rd volume, you start to know a little bit more about him and kind of understand, hey, you know what? I might understand where he's coming from, but he's very much of an anti-hero, or at least starting out in the story, that's how I see him as. Even though I don't know about Berserk, I know about Guts. I definitely know more about him now. I did not know his backstory. I know about Puck, and I know about Griffith. Even though I haven't fully read the show or read the manga, I haven't fully seen any of the show, there's definitely a lot to go over. And starting off, I know what happens to Griffith. I know right now he's a part of the God Hands. I just don't know how we got there, but I'm sure I'll be pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised in the future, how we get to that point. Right now, we're just bare bones for the Black Swordsman Arc. We're learning a little bit more about Guts. So basically, to go over everything, I'm definitely going over spoilers in this. I haven't done any non-spoiler reviews anymore. I don't think that's much my forte, but I'm just gonna dive straight into it, talk about everything that goes on, and feel free to let me know if there's something that I missed, or if there's something that I need to be paying more attention to. Feel free to leave a comment, and I'll definitely be reading everything. If it warrants me having to reply to you, I'll try my best to reply to any comments that I get. So starting off, we get introduced to Guts in the cover page, and he's basically being tortured in the cover panel, and we don't know how he got there, but that shows up a little bit later, probably about 10-15 pages in, we get to what the cover page was talking about. But I gotta say, the first page, the first panel is wild. There's not much to say about it. Unless your friends are cool with this kind of stuff, don't open it around to other people. But we essentially see Guts getting lucky with somebody, and then it turns out, oh, Guts isn't getting that lucky, and then it turns out that this person that he's with is some type of succubus creature, and it later turns out, a couple panels later, that this succubus is actually unlucky. Guts was in control the entire time. He kind of knew what was up, takes care of business, and that's our introduction to Guts. What's really interesting about this story is that it starts off from chapter 1, we see that it's the aftermath of what's happened. He already has this mark on his neck. He's already missing an arm, which is what he uses for his crossbow. He's got the giant sword already that he's been using forever, and we don't know how he got here. And I think that's very interesting. It could be one of those other shows where my name is Guts, and my life is pretty crazy. You're probably wondering how I got here. And it's not any of that crap. It intentionally throws you in to his current dark predicament, and you're left wondering how he got here. Why does he have this hatred? Why does he treat characters like Puck the way that he does? We don't know anything about that, and I believe that's super intentional, because by the end of the first volume, or the first deluxe edition book here, we get a pretty good idea of why he is the way that he is, and it's just beautiful storytelling to me. You could ask questions like, why is he so emotionally dead? I have not gotten to the eclipse, so I don't want any spoilers in the comments, but I know about the eclipse. They mentioned, oh, like the eclipse is coming. So I know that we're gonna get there, and I'm assuming it has something to do with a video that I saw before, like years ago, in the original anime. There's this very dark sequence, and I'm assuming that's what makes Guts who he is. More so than he already was. He was already, in his backstory, going through a ton, but the eclipse makes it that much worse, I'm assuming. But I have no clue how we got there, so, you know, no spoilers just yet. You know, I'm still enjoying my first read-through, my blind read-through. So I want to know how we got there, but how did he become this emotionally dead? That's one of my biggest questions. Based off of Mira's writing style, I can clearly see that there's a lot of shock value. I'm not entirely sure if that's pulling me in or if it's more of a turnoff, but right off the bat, there's extreme violence, there's moral ambiguity, because sometimes it appears that he's doing good, but he's not actually doing it for that person. So I have no clue what his moral framework is, but I'm assuming as I read the story more, I'll get to see more of that, which is weird to say because Guts is our protagonist, but sometimes I find myself not rooting for him. There are some things that he does that sometimes I can't get behind. Like, I know that he hates weak people and he wants to squash them, he says. He's the protagonist, and I'm supposed to be able to connect with this character, and from where I am in the story right now, I don't know that I quite agree with him just yet. I don't know how he got to his jaded self. So we get past our opening sequence, we meet Puck in the bar, he gets freed, he fights some of the Coca Kingdom guards, and we learn, after he's finished being tortured by the mayor and his minions, we get to learn about the brand that he has on his neck. And we don't know what the brand is called just yet, but later on they reveal it to be the brand of sacrifice after he's finished with this Cobra Man, one of the apostles. So there are a couple of things about the brand of sacrifice that's very important. It attracts demons. And it also, I'm assuming, works as a sensor, kind of like Frodo's sting, or I should say Bilbo's sting, but essentially whenever enemies are nearby, sting will start to glow, and in this case, anytime enemies are nearby, his brand starts to hurt him and it starts to bleed. I'm assuming it's kind of like a radar, maybe. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know much about the brand of sacrifice because I haven't gotten to that point yet. It like establishes this sense of dread, knowing that no matter how hard Guts tries, his fate is inevitable. And on top of that, he gets these weird visions. I'm not sure if it's from the brand. Like we see this like slithering fetus character that comes back in his dreams. I'm not sure how important that creature is. Like when he's in his jail cell before Puck reaches him, there's this fetus looking thing that's like crawling towards him. And it's very clear that Guts does not like this thing. If I saw it, me personally, I wouldn't like seeing it either. But also, once we're done in the Coca Castle, we move over to the priest and this girl inside of a carriage, and there's this creature that like latches onto Guts while he's trying to sleep, and it essentially makes them have nightmares, and it feeds off of their fear. But in his nightmare, he also sees this recurring slithering creature again, and I'm not entirely sure the importance of it, but it does establish that Guts never has a time to rest. You're always attracting enemies, you can't sleep, and over time I'm sure that would drive somebody insane, but somebody with the mental fortitude of Guts, I'm assuming he's just built for it, you know. So we're clearly starting off the story on hard mode. Like, everything bad has already happened. He's gotten all the debuffs already, and he's still so determined to find the God Hand, which is why we figure out once he goes into Coca Castle, that was his ultimate goal, is to meet up with that Cobra Man creature. Turns out he's one of the apostles, and he wants to know the location of the God Hand so he can get back to Griffith. I'm assuming this is his revenge story. This is his revenge plot. They pretty much established that where we are now, Guts is already an anti-hero. He's almost villainous to an extent. He's cold, he's more than willing to put others in danger, and he's fueled by vengeance. Very much like Kratos. He does not care about what happens to others so long as he, gets back for what they did to his family. It kind of reminds me of that. Not saying that they're exactly the same, they're not, but I'm getting that kind of vibe from them. And when we move over into the Golden Age, they kind of explain how he got there, but we'll save that for a separate video. Real quick, I also want to talk about the art style of Mira. It's very dark, very detailed. There's a lot of heavy use of shadows, and it's very alluring. The designs of the god hands feel a little much, I was kind of getting confused on a couple of them because they kind of look exactly the same to me personally, but there was so much intricate detail. It's very grotesque at times, but it's also kind of like it captures your attention. It really does. You can spend a fair amount of time just staring at the design and finding all the little features that he added to each character, and I feel like a lot of it's intentional. Like, I didn't realize at first that Guts was missing an arm. Like, I don't know how he got there, but like when we see in his dream sequence, he's completely naked, but you also see that he has this metal arm, and only then did I realize, oh, hey, he's missing an arm, because I must have totally skipped over it, because I'm already, well into Guts' backstory, and I didn't even notice that that was something that was missing. So I don't know how we got there, but, we'll see a little bit later how that, goes down, how that happened. But the way that this story is structured, I think it's really interesting, because a lot of the times when I see backstories, it can really ruin the momentum of a story. Like, for example, One Piece is so notorious for this. We'll, spend years on an arc, and right when we're getting to the final climax, hey, you're in luck. We got 3 months of backstory that we need to get through first before we can get to the final fight. I hate that so much. It ruins the momentum, but I feel like it's done well in this series, because we already know what happened in the aftermath. And so I'm already intrigued. I do truly want to know, how did we get here? And I love the way that the story is structured, because we already know how bad it's gotten, and you have a bunch of questions. You're like, how did we get here? I can see that he hates Griffith. I can see that his life is truly ruined. I see that he's lost everything that he once loved. How much did it mean to Guts that he lost everything? And when you genuinely ask yourself the questions, then I feel like it's okay to get the backstory, because we get all of that up front. Like in this first deluxe edition, we get pretty much everything. And as a reader, I'm intrigued. I want to know how he got there. I just found myself gripped by the story, and I just wanted to continue reading more. And to add to that note, there's also a fair bit of comedy in here, which I can't tell if it's misplaced. Like, the show itself is dark. There's a lot of gore. Guts is a killing machine, and there are moments where he's going back and forth with Puck and, kind of making fun of him. Puck is punching him, and he's making funny faces. And it's just Guts clearly has a sense of humor. He is able to have a laugh. And the way that it's animated is comedic. And so I think it's kind of weird. I'm not sure how I feel about the comedy just yet. It kind of lands for me, but it also kind of takes me out of the story, where what is this show going for? Maybe it's Mira's way of just giving us some reprieve from all the other material that's in the show. But I just think it's an odd contrast to add comedy. I was just kind of surprised by that, but it also kind of lends to the fact that, it adds to what I said earlier, that Guts isn't totally a lost cause. He still has moments of joking around, and even in his backstory, even after everything that happened to him, he still jokes around. Even after everything that happened, when he's meeting Puck, he still jokes around. So it adds to his character for me, is that he has a tender heart somewhat. It's still buried deep somewhere in there. And Puck even feels that. That's one of his powers, is that he can feel his emotion. He knows that Guts is going through a lot, so much so that it makes kind of Puck sick to his stomach. But also, on top of that, he has a tender heart, and at times he does have a sense of humor. So I definitely do like those things about Guts' character. Like we see with the priest and the girl on the carriage. Forgive me, I'm not great at remembering names unless I'm constantly rereading a show. There's this girl, I forget her name, but the girl on the carriage, She immediately dies when Guts's carriage, or the priest's carriage, gets attacked by a bunch of undead skeletons, and the girl immediately dies. But there's a moment during that fight, Guts does not care about fighting the undead. He said it comes with the territory. He was like, I live to fight. This is what I do. And, you know, Puck is kind of taken aback by who Guts is and is very surprised at his power and his resolve. But during that fight, the girl is reanimated and she kills the priest, and Guts is so taken aback by that. And he knows, like, hey, she was so sweet to me earlier. And he actually becomes vulnerable in the middle of a fight and is unable to see that the girl is walking towards him and stabs him directly in the gut. And it really shows that even though he is very stone cold, even though he's had everything taken away from him, it's like he's clinging on to humanity still. He still has emotions. He's still able to be taken aback by his circumstances. And I feel like that lends a lot to his character. Like, he's not completely a lost cause. He's not only a villain. He still has goodness in his heart, but he's hard in that, for sure. But there are moments like this where he slips up in battle because he still has a bit of tenderness in there, and it ends up costing him. Now, of course, he's able to get past it, but it does show you that he's not completely gone, and I appreciate that about his character. Moving swiftly along, after the priest and the girl on the carriage, we go into this new castle area. I'm not sure which kingdom it is, but we get introduced to the counts during a public execution for any heretics in the area. There's a girl, she says she's innocent, but it's clear that there's no real sense of justice based off of our first introduction to the count. Guts is there at the execution, and he takes the execution, or the aftermath of the execution, as an opportunity to essentially declare war on the count. But afterwards, you know, some guards go after him, Guts escapes, and we get our first introduction to Vargas. Vargas has his own crazy backstory as well, mainly at the hands of the counts, but he has enough trust in Guts to kind of show him around his little lab. They explain that he used to be some sort of physician, so he's got a whole bunch of like weird trinkets all over the place that he stays, and he's got this little secret chamber where we get introduced to, I believe it's called the Behelit. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, but it's this weird egg with a bunch of faces on it, and it's very much alive, but it's like stagnant for a majority of the time. It doesn't do anything until like the plot needs it to do something. And Guts later explains that this is a key to go into another dimension where the 5 members of the God Hand reside. And he's actually taken aback that Vargas has the Behelit, and he loses trust with Vargas immediately, choking him, pulling up in the air and saying, "Who are you?" And we later find out that he stole the Behelit from the Count, and he's been trying to study what it is, why it changed who the Count was, because he later explains that the Count used to be a regular human being, but now he's this weird creature, and he believes that it has something to do with this egg, so to speak. Also, I'm doing a quick reread of it, and I did notice something different this time around, and that is how the Count got the Behelit. And he said that he got it by chance with some wandering merchants. He essentially bought it from them, and Guts is not totally convinced that it was by chance, because, you know, later on when we get into the Golden Age, Griffith has the same story of how he received his necklace, and I believe that there is some correlation here. There could be something more from it, but I don't know what that is yet. But I just thought that was kind of interesting on my quick reread, that I did come across that Guts is not entirely certain that this wandering merchant is what they say they are, or if this story even checks out and he just doesn't believe it. No spoilers, please, but that's something that I thought was interesting. I should also mention that there is an instance with both Vargas and Puck where they touch Guts, and it's very clear that Guts does not like to be touched. He makes that very apparent and very clear. Do not ever touch me. And that, when I first read it, it didn't click with me of why it's so important to him, but I'm assuming it has something to do with Gambino in the Golden Age arc. And I'll get more into that in a later video, but I would very much assume that is where that portion of his character is coming from, and it is completely understandable. Another thing that I feel like warrants attention is the dynamic between Guts and Puck. Now, once we say our final goodbyes to Vargas before what happens to him, there's a quick exchange between Puck and Vargas, and Puck just wants to let him know that he thinks it's very important for you to focus on the future rather than trying to avenge the past. And I believe that's going to be very important for Guts' character moving forward, is because that's all Guts' character is right now. He doesn't really have anybody to be whispering in his ear trying to get him to change who he is. And it's very important to know that their ideals are very much the opposite of each other. And I wonder if that dynamic is going to come into play in the future. But it's very clear that Puck does not want Guts to go down the road that he's going down and wants him to focus more on the future, while Guts clearly is very much interested in taking care of Griffith, or at least trying to avenge his past. So moving swiftly along, we get the scene with the execution of Vargas. Now, initially when I first read this, I thought it was more of like edgy, you know, just Guts being there just to show that he truly doesn't care about others. But as I reread it, I feel like it's very important to note the similarities between Vargas and Guts. Vargas survived an apostle just like Guts did. He dedicated his life to revenge, and he lost everything just as Guts had. And it's very clear that Vargas is consumed by hatred, much like Guts is in the current story. Now, what makes it different is that Guts fully realizes is that Vargas is very much like Guts if Guts didn't have the power to do anything. And it's very important to note that Guts hates weaklings. He hates people who cannot fulfill their ambition. If they're unable to swing the sword, it's just natural selection in Guts' mind. But it's very important for him to realize that Vargas is powerless. He has all the exact same key features of Guts, except he does not have the ability to fight back. He does not have the strength to fight back against an apostle. He does not have the strength to fight back against the crowd. He does not have the strength to take on the God Hand. And I feel like Guts uses Vargas's execution as a reminder of that's who he could be, or that's the sad fate of both of them, because even Guts realizes that he doesn't have the power to take on the God Hand, but he still chooses to go fighting. He truly does want to fight back. But he uses Vargas's execution as a reminder to himself that this is a cruel world. We are powerless against the powers that be, so to speak. And Guts sees that this is possibly his future, and he doesn't flinch. You know, the Count clearly uses Vargas's execution as a means to get Guts' attention, and it does. But I feel like it more of strengthens his resolve. And during this, Puck is with him. Puck does want Guts to save Vargas, and he doesn't really understand that Guts is going through something, and it's just that he's choosing to cope in his own way. And while Guts is watching the execution and reminding Puck that he's not going to go out there, it's clearly a trap, right? Puck is able to sense emotions, and he describes it as black magma. And in all of the stress that Puck is currently feeling, he is curious more about Guts' strength. Does his strength come from these like horrible feelings that he has inside? Is it, you know, does he utilize his backstory as a means of resolve to gain power? I feel like that's where that's what the story is trying to tell me. But we also see that Puck notices fear inside of Guts, and we get another glimpse into his character through Puck being able to read emotions. And I kind of like that dynamic, since the story doesn't really, like, Guts is a very stoic character. He tries his best not to speak much. So Puck is a nice contrast, and him being able to read minds is a nice way to progress the plot, or at least to progress Guts's personality, or to better read Guts' personality. But right before Vargas's execution, as I'm doing my reread, it's just great writing by Miura. But, you know, Puck is just trying to understand more of why Guts does not save Vargas. And Guts mentions ambition comes with a price attached. Of course, that price comes too high if you die for nothing. The reward for ambition too great is self-destruction. So after the death of Vargas, Guts, later on that night, he goes to Vargas's grave, or essentially a pit, where they dump all of the bodies of those that were executed. And the guards mentioned that, hey, you know, it's kind of piling up. But Guts just kind of wants to go there to let him know that, Vargas, don't worry, I'm going to keep my promise. But he also takes a moment there to like take a dig at Vargas, like, oh, I'll carry on your legacy, unlike you could, you know, something to that degree. And I'm like, you know, it's still a moment where you're kind of rooting for Guts, but then he just added that at the end, and I'm like, okay, Guts, like I get it. I understand what your character is. So shortly after, Guts goes to the castle and he's wreaking havoc. He's, you know, defeating everyone. Moving swiftly along, we can see that there's a dynamic going on between Puck and the Count's daughter, who is a human daughter. She was around before the Count was transformed into one of the apostles. So we get the kind of the story of Teresa, or Teresia. I'm not really sure how to pronounce her name, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to call her Teresa. So the little girl, Teresa, the Count's daughter, she kind of explains what she believes happened to her mom, and Puck is starting to just understand more about her character, understand more about the Count's backstory, how he used to be a normal king who he was still harsh, but at least he was loved by the people. And she even takes it a step further and explains that I loved him as a father too, which she does not now. You know, the Count is not human anymore, and she's definitely lost her love for him not being the same person. But there's clearly some type of dynamic between the Count and his daughter. Even though he is one of the apostles, he still has that human attachment to her. You know, it still is his daughter. He truly wants her to look his way, and because he's become this new person, she does not see him that way, and that clearly eats away at the Count. But, you know, he's an apostle. It's too late. You know what I mean? Like, shouldn't have done that. So we get the big fight between Guts and the Count. And, you know, at first it kind of looks like Guts is completely outmatched, but once Puck comes in, he brings the Behelit with him, and it's clear that even in this new form that the Count has, it's kind of like this slug caterpillar creature that infinitely regenerates. He's still very much in touch with his human side, because Teresa does come in and she's clearly shocked by his form, the way that he looks, and he doesn't want her to look at him that way. And so it clearly disturbs him, and Guts takes this as an opportunity to defeat the Count. Now, he's still immortal in the human sense, but it was really important for Teresa to come in because I believe it is like a catalyst for activating the Behelit. Yeah, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but, you know, based off of the spelling, I think that's how you pronounce it. So Guts takes this opportunity to torture the Count, showing that he has an undying body and he's constantly stabbing him, and it's traumatizing Teresa. But Guts is fully aware of what it's doing to her, but it's like Guts is not trying to simply defeat the Count. He wants to bring him into the state of despair. And later on, as he's torturing the Count, he starts crying out like, no, I don't want to die. And he's clearly having some type of existential crisis. And in that moment, the Behelit activates and it transports everyone into another dimension. Now, this dimension, it looks a lot, for me, it reminds me a lot of Labyrinth. You know, David Bowie walking around with the little marbles, that kind of, this new setting that we're in, this alternate dimension, it kind of, you know, reminds me of that. And we essentially move from this dark fantasy over to some type of otherworldly horror show. You know, I don't know how to explain it, but everything that we've seen up till now, they're like physical threats, even though these people are like inhumane. The apostles, they have these crazy powers. On the surface, it looks like they don't die, or they very much struggle to die. They're insanely powerful. Now we're moving over into like cosmic territory. Like gravity doesn't work the same. You're working with like supernatural powers, physics powers that Guts has no answer for, at least from what I'm seeing right now in the story. Where Guts is as a character, he's got no answer for these kinds of attacks. So it really shows that there's a true power gap between Griffith and Guts, and it really adds much more punch to the fact that, you know what, Guts kind of is fighting a losing battle. Like he is not winning this fight, or at least first impressions, Guts versus the first encounter with the God Hand, or at least the first encounter that we see, it truly looks like Guts is out of his league and he has no answer for this. So with the introduction of the God Hand, one of them steps up and kind of explains the full backstory of the Count, which has something to do with sacrificing a part of yourself. Now, in the Count's backstory, how he became an apostle is that he walked in on some grotesque scene with his wife, and he did not have the power in himself to take his wife's life, but he was so furious and enraged that he was about to take his own life. Now, during that exchange, there was a Behelit on the counter where his wife was, and it activates, and that kind of reinforces the idea of that you need to be in some form of immense despair for it to activate, and it essentially calls upon the God Hand. Now, that's probably the wrong way to phrase it. You're not calling the God Hand, it's more of like a condition that needs to be met for the God Hand to be summoned. And what's really important about this area where the God Hand resides, it's less of a battlefield and more so it's like a courtroom. So in this instance, since he was unable to take his wife's life, he essentially has to say the magic words, kind of like in Labyrinth. I would just, say that you want the baby to leave, and then he goes to the castle. It's kind of the same thing. Say the magic words, and we will take your wife as a sacrifice, and he does, which grants him this slug, infinite immortal power, and he's able to carry out the deed, taking out his wife. So we realize that that's Count's backstory, and it is, it does add a layer of depth to his character, which is a nice surprise. A lot of the times we get backstories for other villains, and it ruins the momentum of an arc. But in this case, I think it's very necessary to see that apostles do have a level of humanity, and it kind of explains what happened to Griffith. Without spoiling too much, the Black Swordsman Arc kind of highlights that there is some type of personal connection between Guts and Griffith, and it makes very clear that Griffith no longer sees Guts as someone that warrants their attention. And with the backstory of the Count, it's very clear that you have to sacrifice someone truly near and dear to your heart to become an apostle. And I'm assuming you have to get rid of all forms of humanity in order to become a member of the God Hand. Because when the Count becomes a member of the God Hand, it's very clear that Griffith is not among them. And in a chapter later, we do get a short flashback between Griffith and Guts. They're on a battlefield or the aftermath of a battlefield. So there is a dynamic at play there, and they're revealing just a little hint of it, but it's giving us an idea of how you become a member of the God Hand. So I don't know exactly what conditions you need to meet to become a member, but it is very clear that you need to sacrifice all humanity to get to that point. What's also important to note is that when the Count offers up his wife for sacrifice, they show that she has the same brand that Guts has on his neck, and I'm sure later on we'll see a little bit more about how that comes into play. But essentially, they're offering the Count a chance at vengeance, but he still needs to give up a part of himself. And in this case, since everyone that was in the room got teleported to this alternate dimension, Teresa is there, and they're saying, you can't just use anybody as a sacrifice to get what you want. So immediately the Count wants to sacrifice Guts, but the Count has no personal attachment to Guts. So the God Hand mentions, hey, you know what? That doesn't count. You need somebody that if you sacrifice them, it will truly take away a huge part of you. It'll get rid of your last little morsel of humanity. And in this case, they're letting him know, hey, if you want us to avenge you, or if you want, the power to proceed, you're going to have to get rid of your daughter. And it's very clear that the Count has no interest in doing that. So given these dire circumstances, the Count is completely unable to give up his daughter as a sacrifice. It's too much of an ask for him, mainly because he believes that his wife did do something wrong, and his daughter never did anything wrong. And so he's caught in this limbo. He's unable to say the magic words to essentially brand her with the brand of sacrifice, which would essentially banish her to hell. And understandably, he can't do it. But as a consequence of that, the God Hands takes it upon themselves to drag him instead, and there's no resolution for him. Among the souls that come out, we do see Vargas one last time, and he's at the top of the list. He truly wants to see the Count be dragged into the depths of hell, which is among his final words that he said right before he was executed. So it's a nice little close for that story arc to give Vargas some type of closure, and I did appreciate that aspect of the story. And Guts tries to ask Puck to heal his hand so that way he can at least try to get one attack in on Griffith. Now, while he attempts to do so, Griffith just gives him this look, and they are immediately no longer in the dimension. Too bad. Guts had his chance. He could have attacked Griffith, or he at least tried, and they were simply too powerful. He was truly powerless when it came to fighting them, and that's unfortunate. Now, understandably, Teresa is very distraught by what just happened. She learned the truth about what happened to her mother, and she literally saw her father in his final moments show a bit of humanity, started to become more like a father, and he was whisked away to hell. And it's very traumatizing. But Guts, we again get another glimpse into his character. He's kind of not having it. He was just all like, you know what, that's kind of how it is. And in that moment, she is contemplating taking her own life. And we get another aspect of Guts that I don't like. And he was like, do it. You know, you want to take your own life after what you just saw? Fine. And he's like, there's a dagger on the floor. He gives her instructions. And I'm like, you know what? I really don't like that aspect of Guts' character. I understand he's gone through a ton. I understand he's lost everything. But we have seen moments where he shows bits of humanity, and I didn't really like that he was really pushing the boundary of what's okay and not okay to say. And me personally, I didn't appreciate what he said. But even afterwards, she accidentally falls and he saves her, and she clearly has this look of determination in her eyes, and she has this hatred for Guts, saying that if he had never showed up, everything would have stayed the same. She would have preferred to stay locked in her room this entire time. She would much prefer to live in her little fantasy where she thought her mom died in this tragedy, when it was a lot more gruesome, or like what happened what was completely out of the realm of possibility for her. So her entire reality changed, and she's laying all of this blame on Guts. You know, understandably so. She's drawn the connection. If Guts never showed up, the Count would have never died, and she would at least have some type of father figure, even if she didn't want to look at him. And Guts is totally fine with her hating her. As a matter of fact, he's sort of proud, saying like, good, you still have a will to live. And I guess that's what he's going for. And Puck is furious with Guts, and he chases after him when he's walking away, and Puck is very surprised to see that Guts is actually crying. And again, this lends to the part of his character that I like, is that he still has some form of humanity. It's clear that that moment really hurt him. Now, it could be that he's crying over his interaction with Teresa, or he could be crying over the fact that he saw Griffith again. I'm not totally sure, it's kind of up in the air, but that is our conclusion to the Black Swordsman arc. Anyways, I'm enjoying it so far, even though it does take a piece of me away, like reading it. There, you know, it's just some topics that, you know, normally I don't see in media, so I wouldn't say it's a breath of fresh air. It's definitely dark, and it definitely does weigh on me. And that's why I kind of mentioned at the beginning, you know, you kind of have to be in the right mind space to read something like this. It's very heavy material, but, you know, I give props to the creator, Mira, you know, rest in peace. He did create a very intriguing story, and I look forward to see more of what the story has to offer. And now that we completed the Black Swordsman arc, we're going to be moving over into the Golden Age arc, and I have a lot to talk about that as well. And you know, that's for a future video. If there's something that I missed, or if there's like key themes that you want me to know more about, feel free to let me know in the comments. And again, feel free to like and subscribe, hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss more content like this. And yeah, I'm really excited to see more about what this story has for me, and I can't wait to see y'all in the next review. So y'all stay beautiful, and I will see you next time. You still here?